too wordy. That's why I make mine sometimes very wordy, like today's. How you doing, folks? It is Thursday, the 29th of May, 2025, and the Bitcoin 2025 conference in Las Vegas is still happening. And yesterday, it was yesterday, maybe the day before, whatever, I saw the clip some time ago, and it was a clip of the orange sailor, Michael Saylor, sitting there with the Winklevoss twins, or the Winklevi, the Twinklevosses. Anyway, um, they were talking with Michael Saylor about, should what is the point of investing in Bitcoin? And Michael Saylor was saying his usual thing about, Bitcoin outperforms the S&P. It's the first commodity to outperform the S&P. Therefore, companies should invest in that commodity because that's what smart companies do. They put their money into commodities, among other things, to keep their money safe. Well, and then they also spoke with, what was it? Was it Lutnick or? No, David, what's his name? Sachs, David Sachs, the AI and crypto czar of the White House. What a title. Americans are now, since a number of years, giving people with high-level government jobs the title of czar. I'm sure the czars are rolling over in their grave. Sorry for the silence. I'm just enjoying hearing people have discussions about road traffic, yelling at each other to get out of the way, and then as they leave, even while they're still insulting each other, and even as they insult each other after they've left, nevertheless, they say polite goodbyes. I find it very amusing. It's like all that morning frustration people have when they're rushing from one place to another. Totally understandable. And they end up yelling at each other in heated moments of stress. They're relieving their stress. Anyway, why do I mention that? Because it's human nature. And if you look at it from an outsider perspective, sometimes it can be, quite amusing to say the least. Anyway, so back to the topic at hand. So the Twinklevi, we're talking to David Sachs, the AI and crypto czar of the White House, and they were basically asking, so is the government going to buy more Bitcoin beyond the bags that you already hold? And David Sachs, knowingly looks at the audience. I says, well, I don't know, guys. What do you think? As if asking the audience is going to determine anything, right? Other than taking the temperature, so to speak, of the day. And people, of course, cheered on the notion that the government should buy Bitcoin, right? Which is, look, in a world where governments are all buying it up, then what choice do they have, right? On the one hand. On the other hand, this was the exact purpose. This is the exact thing Bitcoin was meant to avoid, right? Bitcoin was invented literally as an escape valve, escape hatch, whatever you want to call it, a way out of centralized control. And now it's all going to be centralized and controlled. It's all going to be centrally controlled by huge corporations like MicroStrategy, and banks and investment groups like, BlackRock and ETF issuers like that and other ones, and the government itself. This is so anti the ethos of crypto, and I've been saying this for years. And I saw on Voidzilla, right, the other channel that Coffeezilla runs, where he talks about kind of like stuff that's very topical without necessarily making a deep dive video. Sometimes it seems a little deepish dive-ish, but not quite. Not as well, not as highly produced as typical Coffeezilla videos are these days. But he was also talking about this, saying like Bitcoin 25 like shows, the anti-ethos of crypto, right? And I've been saying this since well before last year's crypto 2024 conference. If you remember, Bitcoin 2024 conference, I told you guys then, like when Trump came and announced, yeah, we're going to buy 1 million Bitcoin for the government and whatever, we're going to have hundreds of thousands or whatever it is. And Michael Saylor was like, yeah, we're going to buy 1 million. We think other governments should have 1 million too. And then meanwhile they're cheering it on. It's for the people. How is it for the people if it's going to be owned by just the few and the most elite people on earth? When Michael Saylor says there is no second best asset, why is he selling strategy shares? Why is he selling strategy shares? Is there no second best asset? He doesn't believe in his own company, but he's selling it in order to do what? To acquire more Bitcoin for who? His shareholders. So, that's obviously a bit of a joke, right? The guy's out there pumping his own bags and pumping his own, by trashing his own bags, by pumping the source of the pumping that he's doing. Okay? So it's ridiculous. There is no second best. Okay, sure, buddy. There will always be competition. That's the nature of markets, and that's a good thing. Right? If you think the dollar just got to sit at the top of the pile just because it's like everything is pegged to it, don't think that can't change, because it is changing. Right? You understand there were previous world currency reserves, right? Before the dollar, there were other currencies over history that had been the world currency reserve, right? There was the pound, the franc, at one point, the Spanish dollar, right? There have been others. Right? World currency reserves are not this new concept that only existed the last 100 years. No, there were other world currency reserves for a long time. And it usually had to do with who controlled trade, and that usually had to do with who controlled military the most, like who had the strongest military. That's usually who gets to decide. So yeah. So the funny thing is, when that discussion was happening with the Winklevi, they were saying, we think of businesses as like kind of a baseball game, and what inning are we in? And we're still in the first inning when it comes to Bitcoin, and this game's going to go into overtime. Everybody was like, some people in the audience were like, yay, cheering, But the reality is, look, even if Bitcoin lasts, let's say, whatever, 150 years, okay, until it ceases to be mined, and then after that, maybe it has some life after that, okay. So from like 2009, sorry, was when the actual network went live, until like 2000 and, give it another 20, 30 years after the last one's been mined, before validators get sick and tired of not making so much money validating, and then they're just gonna be like, yeah, we're just gonna use a different currency at that point. It'll have been 150 years. Bitcoin had a good run. We'll slowly sideline it or replace it with something else. Who knows what it'll be by then. Right? I'm just this is for the sake of discussion, okay? That's assuming Bitcoin lasts even until that long, okay? Which is a hell of an assumption, because remember, it's still not done mining until like the year roughly 2040. All right? Might be a bit earlier, maybe a bit later, but roughly 2040. Okay. So say it lasts from 2009. Well, from 2009 to 2040 is 131 years, right? Give it another 20 years on top of that, 150 years. Okay, give it another 10 years on top of that, 160 years. Okay, 160 years, pretty good run. That's half the length of the British pound. That's longer than U.S. fiat currency's been running right now, by a lot, right? Like, arguably, real fiat only started in the 70s because before that, from like 1913 or whatever until 1971, it was technically still backed by gold, but it was paper gold. So you could argue, well, who knows how much of that was real or not or whatever, but it was still technically backed by paper gold, and there was never a situation in which all of the gold holders demanded to have all their gold, so the game played out, and the U.S. dollar did okay. It survived that. And then Nixon said, yeah, we're not going to peg it to gold. We're just going to just take our word for it. We're good for it. So that has been around 53, 54 years, something like that. Right? 52 years, whatever the number is. It was the early 70s. I always forget if it was 71 or 73. But somewhere in that time. Right? The dollar completely depegged from gold, and it's just been fiat currency ever since. So we're talking 50-something years. And it could very well last another 10, 20, 30 years as the world reserve currency. But is it going to last another 50 years as the world reserve currency? Is it going to last another 100 years as the world reserve currency? That would make it a 150-year-old currency, right? Frankly, I don't see that happening. I think probably it will be replaced as the world reserve currency within the next century, whether we like it or not. And I don't necessarily know if it's going to be Bitcoin, but there's a small probability. Here's the thing. The probability was actually bigger that might happen before it was bought up by all the millionaires and billionaires and trillionaires, or soon to be trillionaires anyway. Right? The probability was greater when it was still in the hands of retail. But now that it's actually in the hands of the wealthiest people and the governments, well, the governments might like you to believe that it's going to be the world reserve currency, and it may very well be that they officiate that happening. But if it's not distributed among the people to a degree where people can actually use it and live on it, then it doesn't have a chance of ever being a world reserve currency. And since such a tiny amount of people, you realize there's only a couple thousand wallets. And I just posted this number recently. There's a chart you can look up. How many whale wallets are there? Whale wallets meaning a singular wallet with 1,000 or more Bitcoin in it. Right? If you have 1,000 or more Bitcoins in a single wallet, that wallet is a whale wallet. That doesn't mean you're not a whale if you have 10,000 Bitcoins in different wallets. Of course you are. But if you don't have 10,000 Bitcoins in a single wallet, you don't have a whale wallet. Now, here's the funny thing. Satoshi Nakamoto doesn't have a whale wallet, as far as we know. His wallets are pretty much 50 Bitcoins apiece. Because every time he would mine a block, he'd make a new wallet. He, she, it, they, whatever. Every time Satoshi would mine a block and get the reward, Satoshi would, put that Bitcoin or collect that Bitcoin into a new wallet address, which is a very smart way of, first of all, securing the funds by making sure they're not all in a single wallet that you can lose them in. And second of all, those are also a very smart way to decentralize where they all are and make it harder to track which ones are all his. And people make assumptions based on the date last moved, etc. But you don't know for sure that they're all his. Right? There's plenty of wallets from back then that belong to miners who were just hobbying around, who just stumbled on this stuff and got some. I can tell you, I've got a whole bunch of, Bitcoin wallets from 2009 that I will never see the light of day. I don't even remember how much it, whatever. It's like the exact number. Remember how much it was roughly, but If you had it now, it would definitely be life-changing stuff. But I did, I would have certainly used it by now. I'm pretty sure. Um, but yeah, like there's a whole bunch of wallets that have bitcoins that I had that are inaccessible, lost due to time, etc. And you could say, but Yasha, how could you be so dumb? Well, um, when somebody breaks in and destroys all your systems and does all this horrible stuff, and you're talking about a time when literally the value of Bitcoin was literally zero. Okay, the electricity cost way more than the actual Bitcoins were worth. Right, and it didn't take a lot of electricity back then to mine a block relative to today. But even back then, the electricity, especially where I was living at the time, cost way more than the Bitcoin was worth. Like anything I would spend to mine that Bitcoin was costing me more than the Bitcoin was technically worth. Now it had value to me in a business case because I was immediately using it to do things, to to transact information, etc., archive and retrieve information, and pay for content and little small computer parts and things like this. I had all kinds of use cases for it. It was very useful, even from the very beginning. Like, well ahead of Bitcoin Pizza Day. Everyone's always like, "Oh, that's the first transaction where somebody bought something." It's not. It's not even close. But it's the first one where Bitcoin was used to buy a product from a recognized brand in the resale space, right? In the real world, right? That's what it is. But there were people transacting with Bitcoin long before that, bartering stuff or buying stuff, just from independent vendors who were like, "Yeah, right, I'll take this. Sounds interesting." They were probably into it too, right? Send me, 1,000 Bitcoins, and I'll send you this little computer fan, which may seem crazy to you now, and obviously, hindsight is 2020, right? But like, it's not that crazy because at the time it had literally no value, right? And you could always get another 1,000 just by paying another person, $0. Here's a buck. I'll take 1,000 of those. Thank you. That was the market value. That's the thing people forget whenever they think about. Anyway, I don't want to get into that. The point is the fact that the government is buying all this stuff is very antithetical to the entire ethos of Bitcoin. Like 100%. It is antithetical to the ethos. It goes against the very nature of why this stuff was made in the first place. And look, I'm not against, if you want price go up or whatever, sure, great, whatever, enjoy it. And if it does, yay. If it doesn't, oh well, you were in it for the wrong reasons. What can I tell you? But let's at least stop pretending, right? That these guys who are all multi-billionaires, literally, and among the wealthiest ones in the world, who are buying up all the Bitcoin and other digital assets, let's at least stop pretending that these guys are somehow fighting the system and that they're somehow looking out for you. They're not looking out for you. They're looking out for their own skin. They're looking out for their own gain. They're doing what they have to do to stay on top of their world, even if that means stepping on everyone else in the way. Don't forget that. That's what they're doing. That is literally what they're doing. Okay. And they're very good. They are where they are, right? Sure. Family connections. Being connected to wealth is never bad if you're seeking wealth. But let's not pretend, okay? Not even for a moment, that these guys are just looking out for the average person, and that they want you to be in the so-called first inning of have at least a decent size holding. We're well ahead of the curve, even if they got in, quote unquote. Apparently, I cut off. I don't know when, but let's pretend. Okay, let's not pretend that the rich guys are here to save the day, and that they're somehow innovators and pioneers. They're not. Okay, these guys just got on the gravy train. Some of them earlier than others. The Winklevi got on the gravy train early on. You could say they were, in the pioneer period. But they were they were the pioneer investors, investor class. Okay, good for them, wonderful. But they were never going to be. They were never the people for whom it was invented or intended, ever. It was always invented and intended for people who don't have a lot. Like, that's the whole point. And people that have a lot, that tend all of it. You got to remember what their motivations are. And again, I don't care in one sense what their motivations are. When even the British pound has only lasted 300 years, and it's not the world reserve currency since a long time, right? The U.S. dollar remains the world currency, but the U.S. dollar, remember, became, quote unquote, the U.S. dollar as you know it about 50 years ago, when it depegged from everything, and the government just said, "Trust me, bro." So you keep that in mind. You remember, U.S. dollar has been a world reserve currency for about 50 years, and it could easily fall within the next half century, maybe sooner, maybe 20 to 30 years, realistically. Bitcoin's already been around 16 years. And the only thing that might make it the world reserve currency is the very thing it was never supposed to be: a centrally controlled asset that the government favors. Like, quite literally, that's the only thing that might make Bitcoin the world reserve asset, is the government saying, "Yep, this is the world reserve asset now," which is the very, very, very antithesis of what Bitcoin is supposed to do and be. Like, not a little bit, completely, right? Think about it. The entire point of Bitcoin is to let average people have a way out of the financial system, the existing financial system, because the existing financial system has rot in it, has big problems in it. And now that the government, not just of the US, but other countries too, and by the way, states within the US, right? Let's remember, individual US states are also buying up Bitcoin. Some of them have already mandated it, right? Like New Hampshire, I think it was, became the first state in the union about a month ago to say, "That's it, we are buying Bitcoin by law. Our state has to buy a certain amount of Bitcoin now." Like, that's it. It's mandated. It's a law in New Hampshire. They have to buy Bitcoin. The government has to buy. I mean, do you realize what that means? Right? I think 1 out of the 50 states. And yes, it may be a small state in terms of size, but it's not a negligible state. Right? New Hampshire is actually pretty significant in its impact, pound for pound. Like, it's surprising, I know, but you may be like, "What are you talking about? It's a sleepy state. It's the backwoods of the Northeast, New Hampshire and Maine. What are you talking about? Like, nobody even lives there. Nobody goes there. What are you talking about?" No, people live there. People go there. People actually do plenty of business there, and a lot of tech people are there. You may not be aware of that, but there are, in fact, a lot of tech innovators from New Hampshire, in New Hampshire. it's not an accident that they're the first state in the union to pass and mandate a Bitcoin state reserve. Right? Like they actually have one. The U.S. has an executive order to have one. Great, but they haven't actually fully created it in the sense that they don't have any plan to actually buy any more Bitcoin, right? They might buy XRP, they might buy Ethereum, but they also might, like the government, the U.S. government, to acquire more Bitcoin, for example, however much Bitcoin we can get for these 200 tons. So here's a pound of gold. How much can we get? And just convert that, right? They might not. Right, but so far that's the most obvious is to do cost neutral Bitcoin acquisitions, to basically swap one asset that you believe will be not worth as much as Bitcoin might be over time, right? Now, why would they do this if they have every confidence that they know what they're doing, that they're the government, and that everything else? Well, why would they have a reserve for anything? They have a reserve for anything because they want to make sure that they have the assets they need. And why would they get rid of assets they already have if they think they need them? Like, why would they sell their cheese, the government cheese? Literally, the government has cheese. Like, if you don't know that, there are actually government cheese reserves. It's not a joke. If you're the government and you bought all this cheese, which stays good for a long time, talking like big rounds of cheese, that last, like cheddar type cheeses or whatever, big huge wheels of cheese. They weigh hundreds of pounds each at least, and they stay good for a bloody long time in the right circumstances. Why would they sell any of it if they're convinced that it's a national strategic reserve that has some? Well, they would sell some because, first of all, some of it may be coming close to expiration. And they're like, well, we better replace this cheese, right? Some of it. But second of all, because whatever they think it is worth and whatever they think it will be worth in the future, they would clearly think that whatever they're replacing it with will be worth more. Now, you can easily make the argument to me that cheese is worth more than Bitcoins. You can make that argument. I might argue back and say, well, at the current market rate, a Bitcoin is worth a lot more than a pound of cheese, or even a barrel of cheese, right? It's $100,000 something dollars. So Bitcoin's actually worth more in terms of the market, but you can't eat Bitcoins. So if the price of Bitcoins ever falls, you can't eat it. But if the price of cheese ever falls, well, they can, as long as you have it for a very, 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 and I'm okay with that. No problem. I speculate that it will have a value for a very long time. But that's my speculation personally. That's what I think, generally speaking. Yes, it will have a value for a very long time. For many, 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 many reasons, which I've spoken about before. First and foremost, for me, is the ability to send and receive information and store it and retrieve it in an unfettered way, or uncensored, or whatever you want to call it, way, right, without any middleman. That's, for me, the most valuable thing that it allows me to do. And to me, that has real value. Beyond the amount of money that I'm sending, the actual ability to send and receive that information without any impediment is the most important thing about Bitcoin to me. And the fact that it works as bloody well as it has. And you can say, well, it's not the fastest, it's not the best. No, but it works, and it is the most decentralized network, which means it is the safest, right? And it is the hardest to attack. That doesn't mean it's impossible to attack. No, nothing's impossible. Is there an incentive for attacking it? It's really not. That's the thing. If you attack it, then the miners will just shift the algorithm and change to a different, blockchain. Basically, they'll copy it, right? They'll fork it, remove the unwanted pause the network, remove the bad transactions, and kickstart it on the new network that is untainted, right? Now, if you think about it, one of the simplest ways that they could secure the network is actually to do that already by basically having a clone of the network existing, um, literally on every mining system, and to just literally have at the push of a button a thing to say, to roll back to whatever transaction or transactions, to roll back to whatever point in the transaction history it needs to be rolled back to. That way, it would limit the amount of transactions that might get cut out, like legitimate transactions that might get cut out as a result of undoing any bad transactions. Now, of course, you could say, well, wait a minute. Why should that be? If somebody manages to hack the system, so they hack the system, that just shows a failure in the network. Well, yes, if they don't have a backup system, but if they have a system like I just described, then why wouldn't they use that, right? Bitcoin already has done a number of things to combat potential losses due to hacking, right? And there have been more than one incident where they needed to do something to save the network. Back in the olden days, right? Not so long ago, in fact. But in any case, guys, that's kind of my take on this whole thing is, look, I've been telling you for years, government buying Bitcoin is great for price go up, potentially, but it's not great for the ethos of Bitcoin, which was never about price go up. Okay. Yes, there's that famous quote by Satoshi who said, it makes sense to get some in case it happens, to go up in value at some point, right? Or it might make sense to hold some. It might make sense to buy and to get some in case it ever goes up in value, or in case anybody ever thinks it has any value. Sure, you can say that, but he didn't create it for that reason. He created it for the reason of giving people the ability to be able to use an asset that wasn't centrally controlled to conduct transactions of many different types that he didn't even imagine would exist, like ordinals and runes, right? So again, yay, Bitcoin is more than $100,000, but from my point of view, I think that's sad. Sorry. I'd much rather have Bitcoin at a couple $100 a pop, maybe a few grand. I'm not even joking. It doesn't need to be used by the entire world. It doesn't need to be a world reserve currency. It's not intended to be a world reserve currency. Even if it ever becomes one, it's not intended to be. Does it mean it can't? No, it doesn't mean it can't. It might actually become one. But it's not its initial purpose. It's not even its secondary or tertiary purpose. That is an outcropping of investors, smart money, if you will, Silicon Valley bros, tech bros, who got into Bitcoin early enough to see its potential to become a world currency reserve, and to decide, you know what? We'll make zillions more dollars if this thing is the world currency reserve. Yeah, they would. They would. And the average person, you're not going to make zillions of dollars. You're going to be stuck in your day-to-day life, struggling to get by. Even harder than now. Why do I say that? Do you think prices are just going to suddenly go down on things and things are just going to become cheaper again? And you're going to be able to live, on like a couple grand a year or a couple grand a month? Really? In the Western world? You think prices are just going to get cheaper on rent, food, utilities, medicine, clothes, gas, insurance, a car? Really? Do you think houses are just going to suddenly become vastly cheaper? Whenever they say prices are getting lower on things, it's not that prices are actually getting lower on things, is it? It's that they're going up slower than before, right? When it comes to like goods you buy day to day or month to month or week to week or year to year, right? When they say that housing market prices are coming down, the prices aren't actually coming down, are they? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Yes, they're coming. Let's say you have a home you bought for 100 grand and now you're selling it for $500,000. Oh no, but you're only going to sell it for 480. Yeah, no, that's not really prices coming down. You still made out like a bandit. Okay. And congratulations. Wonderful. Um, but like really, when they say prices are coming down, they're not talking about when the actual price is falling. They're talking about when the rate of the growth in price is slowing. And that's not just for houses, that's for food, that's for everything, utilities, right? You name it. It's for all those things. Anyway, guys, that's going to do it for today. I got to get going. Hope you're all doing well. If you want to come learn how to trade, feel free to join the Alpha Trading Discord. That's at alphatradinghq.com/discord. And you can come and get a free volatility chart with all kinds of cool indicators on it, and tons of free educational information and access to the live streams that are Monday through Saturday. They start at 11 usually. And that's going to do it for now. See you guys in the next one. Peace.